Hey everybody, today is Thursday, May the 24th, and you are watching FCN Prime News. I am your anchor, Trezene, and I'm here, of course, to give you all things news, business, politics, and current events of what's happening all on social media, and definitely here to give it to you from a perspective that matters most to you. The facts, only the facts, no narratives at all times. If you haven't already, please like, subscribe, and follow to all of the Fifth Column Network social media platforms. We are on YouTube at /the Fifth Column Network, as well as on Facebook and on Periscope and Twitter and Instagram. We at the news are at FCN_1, my bad. And then you can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and all the such and such at Trezene. That's Trezanay, 8 letters, beautifully spelled. All right, listen, I've got great news stories for you guys today, including some examples of white privilege, if you will, where parents had to actually file a lawsuit in court to get their 30-year-old son out of their house, as well as news in Canada where they didn't handle it too well when someone said you couldn't use the bathroom in their restaurant. And then lastly, a huge feature report giving you updates on the Niger ambush that happened with Sergeant LaDavid Johnson in October. With that, let's go ahead and get into the news for today. All right. So lately, the news has been full of stories of black folks being out in public places, enjoying themselves and staying to themselves, only to find out that some white person has called the cops on them out of suspicion of wrongdoing. Well, that happened to a man in Burger King in 2015, and he is setting himself up to get paid. In November 2015, a homeless man by the name of Emory Ellis went to a Boston area Burger King to purchase a breakfast meal. And the employee accused him of using a fake $10 bill, and he was sent to jail for 3 months. And the $10 bill turned out to be real. Emory Ellis, via his attorney, has filed a lawsuit against Burger King, the franchise owner, and the cashier for the whole thing. For a lot more than the $10, he's suing for $950,000 in damages. His claim is that he was discriminated against for his appearance and that his money would not have been questioned if a white man in a suit had given it to him. At the very least, his attorney says that service should have been denied instead of alerting the police. Ellis was arrested on a charge of forgery of a banknote, and this violated his probation, and as a result, he was denied bail, which is why he spent 3 months in jail waiting for the charges to be dropped after a test of the bill showed that it was real after all. Guess who did the test? The Secret Service. Yes, y'all heard me. Not the little counterfeit marker that's yellow that millions of cashiers use to verify dollar bills. It was the Secret Service that announced in his final hearing that the $10 bill had definitely been real, so the charges got dropped. According to the lawsuit, Ellis didn't even get his $10 back, let alone an apology. Right. Speaking of doing the absolute most for no reason, 2 New Jersey residents were allegedly caught by a priest sexing each other down in broad daylight where they shouldn't be, which was outside between a church and the rector's living quarters. Police say 43-year-old Anthony Michael Gitchius and 48-year-old Noelle Marie Smart were caught fully engaged in the act of sex in a sacred area between the Roman Catholic Church and a rectory, the place where the rector, the person responsible for the upkeep of the church, lives. They were apparently discovered by a priest in broad daylight underneath a statue of the Virgin Mary that was in the garden right behind the church. Guess what else was behind the church? The police station. And the police officers had the misfortune of witnessing it happening in real time. The pair was intoxicated at the time of their arrest. Records show that they are both single and homeless. Records also show that Gitchius had a prior arrest for marijuana possessions, and 4 others were arrested in that arrest with a stolen .38 caliber handgun reportedly found at the scene, along with 50 bags of heroin and 15 grams of marijuana. The couple was charged with lewdness. Gitchius was additionally charged with obstructing the administration of law, and he was also charged with creating a dangerous condition. They are both being held in jail while they wait their bond hearing. While I can certainly understand the desire to want to get nasty in public, I will never be able to understand the desire to do more intimate things in public. Yet, according to this next story, folks still do them. In Langley, British Columbia, Canada, a female customer was seen getting into an argument with an employee at a Tim Hortons restaurant. Apparently, she was so upset that she decided to pull down her pants and poop on the floor. And then, well, surveillance footage was available. We have a clip. Be advised, it is uncensored. Poop and everything else is highly visible. Watch this clip. If you're wondering why this woman was so mad and had her poop at the ready, it turns out that the altercation was about the bathroom policy. The woman was denied access to the bathroom based on her past behavior at that particular location and out of concern for the immediate safety and team members and guests in the restaurant. And upon being denied access to the bathroom, well, she made the restaurant floor her toilet. Absolutely gross. Local police said the woman was found in the parking lot afterwards, and so they arrested her. She has been released and is scheduled for court later this month. Prosecutors are still deciding whether there will be any charges. Prosecutors, please charge her. She picked up her own poo and threw it at someone inside of a kitchen. There are multiple layers of disgusting here. I'm sure you can find a charge somewhere. Before moving on to political news and other current event news, I do have to share this story. It's been all over social media. It's every parent's fear for their kid to move back in with them in their 30s. But it's also always a possibility that your adult child will fall on hard times with unemployment or underemployment, and you'll just end up having another adult in your house. What isn't imaginable is that your kid refuses to get their life together and you have to seek a court order to evict them out of your own house. That's what happened to Christina and Mark Rotundo of New York. They bombarded their son Michael with letters for weeks demanding he leave their home. Michael, who is unemployed and 30 years old, refused even after his parents offered him $1,100 in assistance with the move. Images of at least 5 letters that they sent from the beginning of February of this year to the end of March show how desperate they were for their son to grow up and get the F out. The letter said things like, and I quote, "After a discussion with your mother, we have decided that you must leave this house immediately. Michael Joseph Rotundo, you are hereby evicted effective immediately," unquote. That's crazy. The parents first went to their local small claims court to evict him, but were told that it didn't have the jurisdiction to evict a family member from another family member's home. So the parents had to spend good money to hire a lawyer and pay even more expensive filing fees to have their claim heard in Superior Court. The judge told Michael that he was impressed with his legal research in preparation for his case, but nevertheless ordered him to get out of his parents' house and did not grant him the requested 6 months additional time to do so. The court appearance lasted for about 30 minutes and was described by reporters as surreal. The best detail of it all is that Rotundo actively sought out news cameras as he left the courtroom to tell his side of the story before he went back home to his parents' house. He told news cameras that he doesn't exactly like the living situation either, and he doesn't see why it should have to change because, and I quote, "He is not a burden to his parents because they don't provide him laundry or food." He said that he does have his own business, and with more time, he could have the money to move out. Did I mention that he had been living with his parents rent-free, under and unemployed for the last 8 years? How much more time do you need, you freeloading bum? Turns out that his parents asked him to move out when he lost custody of his 3-year-old son 3 months ago. And clearly, Michael hasn't figured out that they were doing their grandchild the favor, not him. What an entitled a-hole. This is probably a good time to mention that he needs to be placed under surveillance immediately. White male, entitled, recently rejected. Y'all know what that means. Don't play with the facts. All right. In political news, a few updates for you. First, yesterday, a judge ruled that Trump cannot constitutionally block people from his Twitter account. The lawsuit, initiated by the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia University, was filed last year to consider the question whether a public official may, consistent with the First Amendment, block a person from his Twitter account in response to the political views that that person has expressed, and whether the analysis differs when that public official is the president of the United States. The judge basically said the answer to both questions is no. The lawsuit was filed on behalf of 7 people who had been blocked from the president's Twitter account at Real Donald Trump after they individually tweeted messages critical of the president or critical of his policies in reply to a tweet from his actual Twitter account. The lawsuit also named as defendants Daniel Scavio, Sarah Sanders, and Hope Hicks, all of whom were a part of the communications team in Trump's administration at the time of the filing of the lawsuit. I'm going to say this just once, y'all. A legal education, JD or otherwise, should really be a prerequisite for anybody in the business of legislating, police officering, state governing, or U.S. presidency. This is First Amendment 101, fams. All right, in other bad news for President Trump, Special Counsel Robert Mueller's team has announced that they have told the court that they are ready for George Papadopoulos to be sentenced for his guilty crimes. Papadopoulos is Trump's former campaign foreign policy advisor who did plead guilty to lying to the FBI last year, and as a result, he has been cooperating with Mueller's investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 presidential elections. The New York Times reported last year that Papadopoulos bragged to an Australian diplomat that the Russians had damaging information on Democratic presidential candidate at the time, Hillary Clinton, before the 2016 hack of the Democratic National Committee's emails became publicly known. The Australian government then tipped off the FBI to what Papadopoulos had told them. What this all means is typically prosecutors are pretty cautious about sentencing for anyone who's cooperating with them in an investigation, and would not do so if they thought there was any realistic possibility that the cooperator would be needed later down the road. It can be an indicator that Mueller's team doesn't really think that Papadopoulos is going to be cooperative moving forward, or wouldn't be helpful any more than he already has. I'm wondering how much longer we have in this investigation as a result of Mueller's last move. I'm sure Trump isn't happy about losing his Twitter lawsuit and the sentencing of a former team member. So, in classic Trump fashion, Trump is here to distract and deflect as usual. His latest move to distract the press, though, is positive this time. He posthumously has pardoned Jack Johnson. Today, President Trump granted a very rare posthumous pardon to boxing's first black heavyweight champion, clearing Jack Johnson's name more than 100 years after many see as a very racially charged conviction against him. Trump said during an Oval Office ceremony joined by boxer Lennox Lewis and actor Sylvester Stallone that it was time to do so, and it was his honor to do it. Lewis and Stallone have been drawing awareness to Johnson's cause for quite some time. Jack Johnson is a legendary figure in boxing and crossed over into popular culture decades ago when biographies, dramas, and documentaries following the civil rights era. Johnson defeated Tommy Burns for the heavyweight title in 1908 at a time when blacks and whites rarely entered into the same room. He then went on to beat quite a few people in a series of great white hopes, culminating in 1910 with the undefeated former champion James J. Jeffries. Jack Johnson was then convicted in 1913 by an all-white jury for traveling with his white girlfriend. The law for which he was convicted under was the Mann Act, which made it illegal to transport women across state lines for immoral purposes. He served 10 months in prison for the racially motivated injustice and died in 1946. Like I said, posthumous pardons are rare, but they aren't unprecedented. President Bill Clinton pardoned Henry O. Flipper, the first African-American officer to lead the Buffalo Soldiers of the 10th Cavalry Regiment during the Civil War. Bush pardoned Charles Winters, an American volunteer in the Arab-Israeli War convicted of violating the U.S. Neutrality Acts in 1949. Here's the kicker. Linda E. Haywood, the great niece of Jack Johnson, wanted Barack Obama, the nation's first black president, to pardon Johnson, but the Justice Department said it had a policy that processing posthumous pardon petitions is grounded in the belief that the time of the officials involved in the clemency process is better spent on the pardon and commutation request of living person. Barack, what? That's y'all's first black president. In sad news, another update with regard to the Atlanta CDC researcher whose body was pulled from the Chattahoochee River. His death has been ruled a suicide by drowning, according to the Fulton County Medical Examiner. Timothy Cunningham, an epidemiologist with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, was reported missing on February the 14th from his Northwest Atlanta home. On April the 3rd, the 35-year-old's body was found in that river. Cunningham's parents told investigators that their son was not diagnosed with depression, but that he did suffer from mood swings. His parents have also questioned whether he could have been given some type of drug that changed his behavior in the days before his disappearance. However, toxicology tests showed that the only thing in his system was marijuana. There were also no signs of trauma, and it's still unknown how he even came to be in the river. Prime News reported in March the mysterious circumstances of his disappearance, which were Cunningham's parents were unable to reach him by phone, which was unusual, and so they drove from their Maryland home to their son's Atlanta home, where they found all of his personal belongings inside of the house, including his wallet, his cell phone, his SUV in the garage, and his beloved dog, Mr. Bojangles. His parents and sister told investigators that in phone calls and text messages with Timothy shortly before he disappeared, they noticed a difference in his tone. Atlanta police previously said that Cunningham had been upset over not getting a promotion, though the CDC later said that he had received a promotion several months prior to his disappearance. Atlanta police have said the department's investigation into Cunningham's disappearance and death has been officially closed. Hundreds attended the April 21st memorial service for Cunningham, a graduate of Morehouse College and a graduate of Harvard University. Family and friends described him as a goal-oriented, driven man with a passion for helping others. Such a sad ending to that particular story. In my feature story tonight, back in October 2017, Americans were shocked to learn about an ambush on American soldiers in Niger, Africa, and horrified at learning details that seemed to keep unfolding one after another with regard to the whereabouts and remains of Sergeant LaDavid Johnson. Many were skeptical of what was being reported by authorities, and last week, the Department of Defense issued an official report upon the conclusion of a full investigation that took them nearly 8 months after the ambush happened. Here is a timeline of events as reported to the prior of the issuance of that report. On October 3rd, 2017, 12 U.S. Special Operations soldiers and 30 Niger forces went on a mission to gather information, and they were headed from the Niger capital to near Tongo. No resistance was expected, and they were armed with only machine guns and small arms as a result. On October 4th, 2017, on their way back to their operating base, about 50 to 100 attackers ambushed them. They were armed with small arms, rocket-propelled grenades, and technical vehicles. At the time, support was requested 1 hour into the attack, and a remotely piloted aircraft arrived overhead within minutes of the request for help. Its job was to provide surveillance and reconnaissance, which is a military observation of a region, to locate an enemy or ascertain strategic features, and to capture video of the scene. French forces, or more support, showed up 1 hour later, which is 2 hours after the attack officially began. Sergeant LaDavid Johnson was missing at this time, although his name had not been released at this point, and he was not recovered with the others and unaccounted for. Survivors felt at this time that villagers delayed their departure in efforts to be complicit in the ambush. The next day, U.S. Africa Command released a statement regarding the incident, but it gave us absolutely no information on the missing soldier, nor would confirm those. The only thing that they did was express condolences. A reporter at The Intercept claimed to accidentally overhear an hour-long conversation at U.S. Africa Command in Stuttgart, Germany, that proved that they believed Johnson to be alive still that day after the attacks, and were refraining from talking about the situation so that they could execute a rescue mission, and they believed that talking about it in the press would put LaDavid Johnson in further danger. The next day, on October 6, 2017, in that morning, only 3 soldiers were identified as dead, and Johnson still hadn't been named, nor was he accounted for. It wasn't until that evening where LaDavid Johnson's remains were found a mile away from the central scene by Niger forces, but would not confirm anything without investigation. Troops from the U.S., France, and Niger stayed in the area for the entire time until Johnson's body was recovered. The next day, on October 7th, 2017, Johnson's body was returned to Dover Air Force Base. The Pentagon finally then identified Johnson as the 4th soldier who died during that ambush. A few days later, on October 17th, his body was finally returned to Florida to his wife, Maisha Johnson. It arrived shortly after Trump made that disastrous phone call to her and insensitively said that he knew what he had signed up for, but I guess it still hurt. The contents of that phone call touched off a controversy and sparked a feud between Trump and Wilson, a Florida Democrat who was in the car with Maisha Johnson when that call came through. The attack then became more than just a military tragedy. It turned into a political controversy. The Department of Defense announced then that its launch of an investigation would be needed, and that is what it would be doing. Secretary of Defense James Mattis insisted, though, at that time that Johnson was not left behind, despite suspicions from many that he was. On October 23rd, Joint Chiefs Chairman General Joseph Dunford spoke to reporters about the Niger operation during a briefing at the Pentagon that day. He said that more investigation was needed to answer certain questions, including why it took the soldiers an entire hour to request support and information on the circumstances of how and when Johnson became separated from the rest of that group. Those were all questions that we had here at Prime News as well. Fast forward about a month, on November 21st-ish, while the Department of Defense was doing its investigation, more remains belonging to Sergeant LaDavid Johnson were found in Niger, confirming his wife's suspicions that the casket that was delivered to her and the contents in it, she didn't know what it was and was prohibited from viewing. She was concerned that it didn't have her husband in it, and it confirmed her suspicions, which presents us to the present. The United States Department of Defense inquiry, completed nearly 8 months later, found that the 11-member U.S. Special Forces team was not prepared for that mission, and it identified many other flaws in its planning. There also was a video released to claim to show how LaDavid died, but that video, in my opinion, just shows that more conjecture can be allowed. More insulting is that the report that the Pentagon publicly issued is a slim 8-page executive summary that hardly answers any of the real questions. It's 8 pages, 18 font, double-spaced. Okay, that part is an exaggeration, but you get my point. The full 180-page report is still being carefully reviewed and redacted before it's publicly released. Disappointingly, the executive summary has not called for the discipline or accountability of anybody involved. However, it did place blame on junior officers for planning failures that had absolutely no bearing on the ambush or its results. Good Lord. The report concluded that Johnson, who was athletic and a runner, was in the lead in running away, and he's the one who got the furthest away, seeking cover in the brush. Officials say that there were a number of enemy shells around Johnson and evidence that he appeared to fight to the end. His boots and other equipment were later stolen, but he was still wearing his uniform when he was found. This report directly conflicts with reports from the Nigerian folks who found Sergeant LaDavid Johnson's body and brought his remains back into American custody. The Washington Post reported that a 23-year-old farmer and trader saw Johnson's body on October 6, 2 days after the attack. The Post also reported that the young man found Johnson's remain about a mile away from the ambush site, lying face down. The back of his head had been smashed by something. He said his 2 arms were tied behind his back, he said, which many view as evidence that he was executed. The village chief of Tongo, Mankula Alassane, confirmed in his account in a separate interview with the Post. He said that the back of LaDavid's head was a mess, as if they had hit him with something hard like a hammer. He said that they also took his shoes. He was only wearing his socks when they found him. The village's accounts have been vigorously disputed by the United States, who have expressed concern that they have received insufficient or conflicting information about what happened. U.S. officials reported that Army Sergeant LaDavid Johnson died in a hail of gunfire, hit as many as 18 times as he took cover in the thick brush, fighting to the end after fleeing militants, and that Johnson wasn't captured alive or killed at close range. Those are highly conflicting accounts. In closing about this story, a little bit about Sergeant LaDavid Johnson. He is a native of Miami Gardens, Florida. He enlisted in the Army in January 2014 as a wheeled vehicle mechanic. He was assigned to the 3rd Special Forces Group Airborne in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. His awards and decorations include the Army Achievement Medal, the Army Good Conduct Medal, the Global War on Terrorism Medal, the Army Service Ribbon. He's also been awarded the Army Parachutist Badge, the Army Air Assault Badge, the Driver and Mechanic Badge, and he's also been awarded the Marksmanship Qualification Badge, claiming him to be a sharpshooter with a rifle. He was married, as we all know, to Maisha Johnson, and he was the father of a 2-year-old son and a 6-year-old daughter. He and his wife Maisha were set to welcome a 3rd child in January, to whom she did give birth after his death. He was also heavily involved in volunteering as well. He was part of a 5,000 Role Model of Excellence program that U.S. Congressman Representative Wilson founded in 1993 in an effort to recruit adult male role models and train them to help at-risk youth. He was a role model to many young men in that program. In my final story tonight, only because it was breaking news today, as I was preparing Prime News, former Hollywood film producer Harvey Weinstein is expected to surrender to New York City police on charges of sexual misconduct tomorrow. The New York Times reported that, citing 2 unidentified law enforcement officials. Benjamin Brafman, a lawyer for Weinstein, did decline to report on this Thursday report. More than 70 women have accused the co-founder of Miramax Studio and the Weinstein Company with sexual misconduct, including rape allegations that gave rise to the hashtag #MeToo movement, in which hundreds of women have publicly accused powerful men in business, government, and entertainment. Weinstein, of course, has denied having non-consensual sex with anyone. It's about time, considering Bill Cosby done been tried and convicted and R. Kelly is being muted. With that, that's all I have for Prime News. Do we have any comments today on today's report? Because, yeah, I didn't have my Facebook up today. While we find that out, while you're waiting, if you haven't liked, subscribed, or followed to any of our platforms, please do. We're at hashtag The Fifth Column Network is on YouTube and Facebook, and then you can find Prime News on FCN_1 on Instagram, Twitter, and Periscope. So if you haven't done that, please do that. Follow me as well on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Trezene. I'm always online. You can always hit me up with questions or if anything that I'm saying, or you want to start some beef, that's fine. I'm there for that too. Yeah.
We got a comment.
Yeah.
By Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
So a skittish Brit, an imaginary boxer, and a fake president pardons the first successful black man who dated a white woman who happened to be a prize fighter and inventor of the racist, quote, monkey wrench.
Yikes. That was loaded.
Hey, accurate.
You should have wrote that story, the Revolution.
Accurate.
Jesus Lord.
It was an odd pairing.
Yes, I thought so too.
Campaigning for him.
I thought so too.
That's
it?
Yep.
All right. Well, with that, that's the end of Prime News episode 56. If you wanted to know a number again, make sure you like, subscribe, and follow. Following this will be True Baller Thursday, hosted by J. Cole Is It and the Reggie Mathis. You have any guests today, J. Cole?
Yeah, Brianna Buckets will be here.
Oh, Brianna Buckets will be here in the studio. So that's going to definitely be a good show. So make sure go get some snacks, grab dinner, grab something to drink, and then come on back to get ready for True Baller Thursday. With that, I'm Trezene. You guys will have a great evening.